Palace Chop House, Newark, New Jersey. The 23rd of October, 1935. 3 bullets tore through Dutch Schultz's chest. The killers walked away thinking they'd just eliminated the most dangerous man in New York. They were wrong on both counts. Dutch didn't die that night, and what happened next would make his enemies wish they'd put 10 bullets in him instead of 3. This isn't the story you know. This is the story they tried to bury. The night that should have ended everything by 1935, Dutch Schultz had made too many enemies. Thomas Dewey was hunting him for tax evasion. Lucky Luciano wanted his territory. The commission had voted him out, permanently. Dutch knew death was coming. What he didn't know was when, the 23rd of October, 10:15 p.m., Charles Workman and Emmanuel Mendy Weiss walked into the Palace Chop House carrying a sawed-off shotgun and a .38 caliber pistol. Murder. Inc.'s finest, sent by Lucky Luciano to solve the Dutch problem once and for all. Dutch was in the back room with his 3 lieutenants, counting the week's profits. Otto Berman. His accountant, Abe Landau. His enforcer, Bernard Lulu Rosenkrantz. His bodyguard. The shooting started without warning. Workman kicked in the door. Shotgun raised. 3 quick blasts. Berman went down first, then Landau. Rosenkrantz tried to return fire, but collapsed before he could aim. Dutch dove for cover behind an overturned table, but Weiss was already flanking him. 3 shots from the .38. All 3 bullets hit Dutch center mass, chest, abdomen, shoulder. Dutch collapsed, blood pooling beneath him. His breathing was shallow, labored. His eyes rolled back. Workman checked for a pulse, barely there, fading fast. "He is done," Workman told Weiss. "Let's go." They left Dutch Schultz bleeding out on the floor of that back room, confident they'd just earned their fee from Lucky Luciano. But Dutch Schultz had survived worse than 3 bullets. The miracle that changed everything what the killers didn't know was that Dutch had been preparing for this moment for months. Dr. Samuel Rosen, a surgeon who'd patched up half the gangsters in New York, had been secretly working with Dutch since August. Not just as his doctor, as his insurance policy. Rosen had taught Dutch how to slow his breathing to mimic death, how to control his pulse, how to enter a state that looked like the end but wasn't. More importantly, Rosen had been experimenting with a new surgical technique for trauma victims. Internal bleeding could be stopped, organs could be repaired, even when the damage looked fatal. When the ambulance arrived at Palace Chop House, Dutch was barely breathing. The paramedics called it a miracle he was still alive. What they didn't know was that Dutch was conscious through most of it, controlling his body's response to the trauma. Buying time until he could reach Dr. Rosen, Newark Hospital. 11:47 p.m., Dr. Rosen was waiting. The official report stated that Dutch Schultz died on the operating table at 12:03 a.m., the 24th of October, 1935. Massive internal bleeding, multiple organ failure. Beyond medical help, the death certificate was signed. The body was released to a funeral home owned by one of Dutch's associates. The newspapers ran the obituaries. Dutch Schultz was dead officially. But in a private clinic in Queens, Dutch Schultz was very much alive. The 2-year disappearance Dr. Rosen's clinic was a fortress. No visitors, no records. Patients paid in cash and asked no questions. Dutch spent 6 months recovering, learning to walk again, building his strength, planning. The 3 bullets had done damage. His left arm would never work quite right. He walked with a slight limp, but he was alive, and that was enough. More importantly, he was invisible. For 2 years, the New York underworld believed Dutch Schultz was dead. Lucky Luciano carved up his territory. The commission redistributed his operations. His enemies celebrated. Meanwhile, Dutch was building something new, something they'd never see coming. He started with the money. Before the shooting, Dutch had hidden $7 million in various locations throughout New York and New Jersey. Cash diamonds, gold coins. His insurance policy, now it became his war chest. Dutch began recruiting, not from the usual pool of street thugs and muscle. He went after specialists, former military men who'd fought in World War I, ex-cops who'd been forced out for corruption, professional killers from Detroit and Chicago who had no connections to New York's families, men who couldn't be traced back to him, Men who thought they were working for a mysterious benefactor who paid in cash and asked for very specific services. By 1937, Dutch had assembled a ghost army. 23 men, no criminal records in New York, no known associates, no pattern that could be traced back to a dead gangster named Dutch Schultz. It was time to collect some debts. The reckoning begins. Charles Workman thought he was safe. The man who'd pulled the trigger at Palace Chop House was living well off his payment from Lucky Luciano. He'd moved to Brooklyn, bought a house, settled into the quiet life of a semi-retired killer. The 15th of March, 1937. Workman was walking to his car after dinner at his favorite restaurant. A black Packard pulled up alongside him. The window rolled down. "Hello, Charlie." Workman looked into the car and saw a ghost. Dutch Schultz, very much alive, very much angry, was pointing a .45 automatic at Workman's chest. "Get in the car, Charlie. We need to talk." Workman's hands were shaking as he opened the car door. "Dutch," I thought. "We all thought you were dead," Dutch smiled. "That was the idea." The Packard drove to a warehouse in Queens, the same warehouse where Dutch had stored bootleg liquor during Prohibition. Now it served a different purpose. Dutch had Workman tied to a chair in the middle of the empty space. "You put 3 bullets in me, Charlie. I spent 6 months learning to walk again. 2 years planning this moment. Now I want to hear you explain why I shouldn't put 3 bullets in you." Workman was crying now. "It was business, Dutch. Nothing personal. Luciano paid us. We were just following orders." Dutch nodded slowly. "Following orders. I understand that. But see, Charlie, I am not going to kill you. That would be too easy." Dutch walked to a table covered with photographs. He picked one up and showed it to Workman. It was a picture of Workman's daughter walking to school. Beautiful girl, 12 years old, right? Goes to St. Mary's Academy. Workman's eyes went wide. "Dutch, please. She has nothing to do with this." "You are right. She doesn't. But here is what is going to happen. You are going to work for me now. You are going to do exactly what I tell you to do. And if you ever disappoint me, if you ever try to run, if you ever think about going back to Luciano, I'll visit your daughter. Do we understand each other?" Workman nodded frantically. Dutch untied him. "Good. Your first assignment is Emmanuel Weiss. I want him brought to me alive. You have 48 hours." The ghost army strikes. Emmanuel Mendy Weiss had been more careful than Workman. After the Palace Chop House shooting, he'd changed his name, moved to Philadelphia, started a legitimate business, but Dutch's ghost army was thorough. It took them 3 days to track Weiss down. They grabbed him outside his apartment at 2 a.m., blindfolded him, drove him to the same Queens warehouse where Workman had been recruited. When they removed the blindfold, Weiss saw Dutch Schultz sitting calmly in a chair, reading a newspaper. Weiss actually fainted. When he came to, Dutch was standing over him. "Hello, Mendy, miss me?" What happened next was different from the Workman encounter. Dutch didn't threaten Weiss's family. He did something worse. He showed Weiss a ledger. "This is a record of every job you've done for murder. Ink, every name, every date, every method. Very detailed, very incriminating." Dutch flipped through the pages. Joseph Rosen, 1936. Morris Diamond, 1937. The Amberg brothers, last month. Funny thing about evidence, Mendy. It has a way of finding its way to the district attorney's office. Weiss was sweating now. "What do you want, Dutch?" "I want Lucky Luciano to know I am alive, but I want him to find out slowly, piece by piece. I want him to understand that everyone who betrayed me is going to pay, including him." Dutch closed the ledger. "You are going to help me with that, starting tonight." Lucky Luciano's Nightmare, October 1937. Lucky Luciano was in his office at the Claridge Hotel, reviewing the monthly receipts from his operations. Business was good. Dutch Schultz's old territory was producing solid profits. The commission was stable. Then his phone rang. "Mr. Luciano, you might want to look out your window." Luciano walked to the window and looked down at the street. Across from the hotel, under a street lamp, stood a man in a fedora and overcoat. The man was looking directly up at Luciano's window. Even from 5 stories up, Luciano recognized the face. "Dutch Schultz, Luciano grabbed his phone, called his bodyguards. By the time they reached the street, the man was gone. Luciano convinced himself he'd been seeing things. Stress, too much work. Dutch Schultz was dead. He'd seen the death certificate. The next night, Luciano was having dinner at his favorite restaurant. The waiter brought him a bottle of wine. Compliments of the gentleman at the bar. Luciano looked toward the bar empty, but attached to the wine bottle was a note. Soon, DS. Luciano's hands were shaking as he called for his car. This continued for weeks. Dutch appearing in crowds always just out of reach. Notes left in Luciano's apartment. Phone calls with no voice, just breathing. Luciano stopped sleeping. He tripled his security. He moved to a different hotel every night. But he couldn't escape the growing certainty that Dutch Schultz was alive and coming for him. The Commission in Crisis, November 1937. Frank Costello called an emergency meeting of the Commission. All 5 family heads gathered at a warehouse in the Bronx. "We have a problem," Costello announced. "Dutch Schultz." "Dutch is dead," said Albert Anastasia. "I saw the body myself." "Did you?" Costello asked. "Because Charlie Workman says different. And Mendy Weiss has disappeared. And Lucky hasn't slept in 3 weeks. Costello placed a folder on the table. "This arrived at my office yesterday. Photographs. Very detailed photographs." He opened the folder. Inside were surveillance photos of each commission member coming out of their homes. Eating at restaurants, meeting with associates, and in the corner of each photograph, barely visible, was the same figure. A man in a fedora and overcoat. "Simone is watching us," Costello said. "Simone with resources, someone who knows our routines, someone who wants us to know we're being watched." Carlo Gambino leaned forward. "You think it is Dutch?" "I think," Costello said carefully, "that we may have made a mistake." The final confrontation, the 15th of December, 1937. Lucky Luciano received a phone call at 3 a.m. "Pier 47, come alone, 1 hour." Luciano knew the voice. He'd heard it in his nightmares for 2 months. Dutch Schultz. Luciano could have sent his army, could have surrounded the pier with 50 gunmen, could have ended this ghost story once and for all. Instead, he did something that surprised everyone, including himself. He went alone. Pier 47 was deserted, except for 2 men standing at the end of the dock. Dutch Schultz and Lucky Luciano, facing each other across 20 feet of wooden planks. "You look good for a dead man," Luciano said. Dutch smiled. "You look terrible for a living one." They stood in silence for a moment, 2 kings of the underworld sizing each other up. "So what happens now?" Luciano asked. "You kill me, start a war, burn down New York?" Dutch shook his head. "I am done with New York, Charlie. Done with the commission, done with all of it." He pulled out an envelope and tossed it at Luciano's feet. "Everything I had on you and your organization. Names, dates, evidence. Enough to put you away for life. Consider it a gift." Luciano picked up the envelope but didn't open it. "What is the catch?" "No catch. I am disappearing, Charlie. For real this time. But I wanted you to understand something first." Dutch stepped closer. "You can kill a man, but you can't kill what he represents. You can't kill the idea of him. You can't kill the fear that maybe, just maybe, you didn't finish the job." He turned to walk away, then looked back. "Sleep well, Charlie. I know I will." The legend lives on. Dutch Schultz vanished that night. Some say he went to South America. Others believe he died quietly in a small-town clinic, finally succumbing to complications from his wounds. But Lucky Luciano never forgot that conversation on the pier. For the rest of his life, he kept Dutch's evidence in a safe, untouched. A reminder of the night a dead man taught him about mercy. Charles Workman served Dutch faithfully until 1941, when he was finally arrested for the original Palace Chop House shooting. He spent the rest of his life in prison, never revealing that his victim had survived. The commission learned a different lesson. They learned that some men are too dangerous to kill, too smart to trust, and too stubborn to stay dead. They put 3 bullets in Dutch Schultz's chest, but they couldn't put bullets in his legend. And sometimes, late at night in the back rooms of New York's underworld, old-timers still tell the story of the gangster who died twice and lived to make his enemies beg for mercy. Because Dutch Schultz proved something that every king of the streets should remember. It is not how many bullets you survive that makes you legendary. It is what you do with the time those bullets give you.